Hello, darlings. Welcome to the Gentleman Psychic. Forgive me, I am holding my computer, but I'm here because I wanted to show you something in a moment. But you know what I have to do? I have to go right over here to this handy dandy thing, and then I have to see that I'm live. Let's see. Where am I? No. Let's see. Your channel. Watch it start playing on me. Oh, we've got someone here now. Oh, hello, Carlos. That's okay, Sloy. Good to see you. I am trying to figure out again. I don't know why. I can never figure it out. Let's see. Where am I? No. Let's see. It normally shows that I'm live. And then, oh, there it is. Okay. And then I can share it from there. That's not a very flattering shot of me. Let's see. Quality, cancel loop, captions, no. Why won't it let me share? Because I didn't hit the right button, that's why. Copy link. And we go right over here to the Facebook. The Gentleman Psychic. And then we share it there. I'm doing well, Saloy. Thank you. How are you? Create a post. We share here. Let's see. Story time. We publish that one. And then we go right back over here to the Facebook, the regular Facebook, and we share it here. Join me live on Story Time. Okay. So we got that out of the way. Hi, Mary Jane. Good to see you. So I'm not as formal as I normally am because I have my jacket off. I have my sleeves rolled up. I'm not wearing my ring. And you may notice the background is slightly different. But that is because I am out here on the patio and I am painting. This is what I'm working on right there. It's going to have a name emblazoned across on that banner. But what name, what word, I do not know, but that is what I have so far. It is not finished, but it is coming along nicely. But that is what I have for you. Okay, anyway, let me set you over here, and then I'm going to adjust this light so that I am not so unattractive there. That's a little better, and we'll turn it down a little bit. That's a little better. Let's see, maybe if I turn that. Oh, I think I unplugged it. That's okay. Okay. I think it should have the new school name on it. It would be really cool. Yes, that would be really cool. That is, however, that I love the company and I love working with them, but it is not something that is really my own. So, but thank you for the lovely suggestion, Malika. Not quite what I'm going for. But anyway, let's see, maybe if nope, still off. That's okay. That's okay. All right, my darlings. I'm going to bring you ever so much closer because I feel like I didn't really measure out where you were going to be today. And that might be a little bit better. Let me see. We'll move this little elephant over a little bit there. Okay, it's not really the most flattering view. It would be nice if it were just a hair taller, but we're here and it's what we're going to deal with. So So as Malika pointed out, yes, there is a new school. Oh, hi, Lauren. Good to see you. Um, Good to see you there. We've got Malika, Mary Jane, Sloy, and Carlos. So hello, my friends. Yes, there is a new school over at Nick Haunted Diary. It is the University Magicus, but there's plenty over there on his site for that, and I have some things of my own. So for those of you who are joining me who are new, um, welcome to The Gentleman Psychic, where I read classic novels every week, and also I know it's been a long time since I've produced a video. I have been crazy busy, but hopefully I will be able to take time. I need to just force myself to do it. Anyway, lovelies, without further ado, I present to you The Sorrows of Satan, Chapter 25. A few days after the entertainment at Willowsmere, and before the society papers had done talking about it, the magnificence and luxury displayed on that occasion, I woke up one morning, like the great poet Byron, to find myself famous, not for any intellectual achievement, not for any unexpected deed or of heroism, not for any resolved or noble attitude in society or politics. No, I owed my fame merely to quadruped. Phosphor won the Derby. It was about a neck-and-neck contest between my racer and that of the Prime Minister. And for a second or so, the result seemed doubtful, but as the two jockeys neared the goal, MIL, whose thin, wiry figure, clad the brightest of bright scarlet silk, stuck to his horse as though he were part of it, but Phosphor, to a pace he had never yet exhibited, appearing to skim along the ground at literally flying speed. The upshot being that he scored triumphant victory, reaching the winning post a couple of yards or more ahead of his rival. Acclamations rent the air at the vigor displayed at the finish, and I became the hero of the day, the darling of the populace. I was somewhat amused at the Premier's discomfiture. He took his beating rather badly. He did not know me, nor I him. I was not of his politics, and I did not care a jot for his feelings one way or the other. But I was gratified in a certain satirical sense to find myself suddenly acknowledged as a greater man than he, because I was the owner of the Derby winner. Before I well knew where I was, I found myself being presented to the Prince of Wales, who shook hands with me and congratulated me. All the biggest aristocrats in England were willing and eager to be introduced to me, and inwardly I laughed at this exhibition of taste and culture on the part of the gentlemen of England that lived at home at ease. They crowded round Phosphor, whose wild-eyed warned strangers against taking liberties with him, but who seemed not a whit the worse for his exhortations, and who apparently was quite ready to run the race over again with equal pleasure and success. MIL's dark, sly face and cruel ferret eyes were evidently not attractive to the majority of the gentlemen on the turf, though his answers to all the queries put him were admirably ready, respectful, and not without wit. But to me, the whole sum of the substance of the occasion was the fact that I, Geoffrey Tempest, once struggling author, now the millionaire, was simply by virtue of ownership of the Derby winner famous at last, or what society considers famous. That fame that secures for a man the attention of the nobility and gentry, to quote from tradesmen advertisements, and also obtains the persistent adulation and shameless pursuit of all the demi-mondaines who want jewels and horses and yachts presented to them in exchange for a few tainted kisses from their carmined lips. Under the shower of compliments I received, I stood apparently delighted, smiling, affable, and courteous, entering into the spirit of the occasion. and shaking hands with my lord, that and Sir something nobody, and his serene highness the Grand Duke so-and-so of Beerland, and his other serene lowness of small principality. But in my secret soul I scorned these people with their social humbug and hypocrisy, scorned them with such a deadly scorn as almost amazed myself, when presently I walked off the course with Lucio, who was, as usual, seemed to know and to be friends with everybody. He spoke in accents that were far more grave and gentle than I had ever heard him use before. With all your egotism, Geoffrey, there is something forcible and noble in your nature, something which rises up in bold revolt against falsehood and sham. Why, in heaven's name, do you not give it away? I looked at him, amazed, and laughed. Give it away? What do you mean? Would you have me tell humbugs that I know them as such, and liars that I discern their lies? My dear fellow, society would become too hot to hold me. It could not be hotter or colder than hell, if you believed in hell, which you do not, he rejoined in the same quiet voice. But I did not assume that you should say these things straight out and bluntly to give offense. An affronting candor is not nobleness. It is merely coarse. To act nobly is better than to speak. And what would you have me do? I asked curiously. He was silent for a moment, and seemed to be earnestly, almost painfully considering. Then he answered. My advice will seem to you singular, Geoffrey, but if you want it, here it is. Give, as I said, the noble, and what the world would call the quixotic part of your nature fall away. Do not sacrifice your higher sense of what is right and just for the sake of pandering to anyone's power or influence, and say farewell to me. I am no use to you, save to your humor and varying fancies, and introduce you to those great or small personages you wish to know for your own convenience or advantage. Believe me, it would be much better for you, and much more consoling at the inevitable hour of death, if you were to let all this false and frivolous nonsense go, and me with it. Leave society to its own fools, whirligig of distracted follies. Put royalty in its true place, and show it all as pomp, arrogance, and the glitter are worthless, and itself a nothing compared to the upright standing of a brave soul in an honest man, and as Christ said to the rich ruler, sell half that thou hast, and give to the poor. I was silent for a minute or so, out of sheer surprise, while he watched me closely, his face pale and expectant. A curious shock of something like compunction startled my conscience, and for a brief space I was moved to a vague regret that with all the enormous capability I possessed of doing good of numbers of fellow creatures with the vast wealth I owned, I had not attained to any higher moral attitude than that represented by the frivolous folk who make up what is called the upper ten of society. I took the same egotistical pleasure in myself and my own doings as any of them, and I was too full, as foolishly conventional, smooth-tongued, and hypocritical as they. They acted their part as I acted mine. None of us were ever our real selves for a moment. In every truth, one of the reasons why fashionable men and women cannot bear to be alone is that a solitude in which they are compelled to look face to face upon the secret selves becomes unbearable because of the burden they carry of concealed vice and accusing shame. My emotion soon passed, however, and slipping my arm through Lucio's, I smiled and answered, Your advice, my dear fellow, would do credit to the Salvationist preacher, but it's quite valueless to me, because I'm impossible to follow. To say farewell forever to you, in the first place, would be to make myself guilty of the blackest ingratitude. In the second instance, society, with all its ridiculous humbug, is nevertheless necessary for the amusement of myself and my future wife. Royalty, moreover, is accustomed to be flattered, and we shall not be hurt by joining in the general inane chorus. Thirdly, if I did as the visionary Jew suggested. What visionary Jew? He asked, his eyes sparkling coldly. Christ, of course, I rejoined lightly. The shadow of a strange smile parted his lips. It is the fashion to blaspheme, he said. A mark of brilliancy in literature and wit in society. I forgot. Pray, go on. If you did as Christ suggested. Yes, if I give half my goods to the poor, I should not be thanked for it, or considered anything but a fool for my pains. You would wish to be thanked, he said. Naturally. Most people like to have a little gratitude in return for benefits. They do. And the Creator, who is always giving, is supposed to like gratitude also, he observed. Nevertheless, he seldom gets it. I do not talk of hyperphysical nothingness, I said with impatience. I am speaking of the plain facts of this world, and the people who live in it. If one gives largely, one expects to be acknowledged as generous. But if I were to divide my fortune and hand half of it to the poor, the matter would be chronicled in about 6 lines in one of the papers, and society would exclaim, "What a fool!" Then let us talk no more about it, said Lucio, his brows clearing and his eyes gathering again in wonted light of mockery and mirth. Having won the Derby, you have really done all 19th century civilization expects you to do, and for your reward, you will be in universal demand everywhere. You may hope soon to dine at Marlborough House, and a little backstair influence and political jobbery will work you into the cabinet if you care for it. Did I not tell you I would set you up successfully as the bear who has reached the bun on top of the slippery pole of the spectacle, for envy of men and the wonder of angels? Well, there you are, triumphant, a great creature, Geoffrey. In fact, you are the greatest product of the age, a man with 5 millions and owner of the Derby winner. What is the glory of intellect compared to such position as yours? Men envy you. And as for angels, if there are any, you may be sure they do wonder. A man's fame guaranteed by a horse is something indeed to make an angel stare. He laughed uproariously, and from that day he never spoke again of his singular proposition that I should part with him and let the nobler nature in me have its way. I was not to know then what he had staked a chance upon, my soul, and lost it, and that from henceforward he took a determined course with me, implacably on to the appalling end. My marriage took place in the appointed day in June, with all the pomp and extravagant show befitting my position and that of the woman I had chosen to wed. It is needless to describe the gorgeousness of the ceremony in detail. Any fashionable lady's paper describing the wedding of an earl's daughter to a 5-fold millionaire will give an idea in hysterical rhapsody of the general effect. It was an amazing scene, and one in which costly millinery completely vanquished all the considerations of solemnity or sacredness in the supposed divine ordinance. The impressive command I require, and charge ye both, as ye will answer at the dreadful day of judgment, did not obtain half so much awed attention as the exquisite knots of pearls and diamonds which fastened the bride's silver-embroidered train to her shoulders. And the world and his wife were present. That is the social world, which imagines no other world exists though it is the least part of the community. The Prince of Wales honoured us by his presence. 2 great dignitaries of the church performed the marriage rite, resplendent in redundant fullness of white sleeve and surplice, and equally imposing in the fatness of their bodies, and unctuous redness of their faces. And Lucio was my best man. He was high, almost wild spirits, and during our drive to the church together, he entertained me all the way with numerous droll stories, mostly at the expense of the clergy. When we reached the sacred edifice, he said laughingly as he alighted, "Did you ever hear it reported, Geoffrey, that the devil is unable to enter a church because of the cross upon it or within it?" I have heard some such nonsense, I replied, smiling at the humor expressed in his sparkling eyes and eloquent features. It is nonsense, for the makers of the legend forgot one thing, he continued, dropping his voice to a whisper as we passed under the carved Gothic portico. The cross may be present, but so is the clergyman, and wherever a clergyman goes, the devil can follow. I almost laughed aloud at his manner of making this irreverent observation, and the look with which he accompanied it, the rich tone of the organ creeping softly on the flower-scented silence, however, quickly solemnized my mood, and while I leaned against the altar rails, waiting for my bride, I caught myself wondering for the 100th time or more at my comrade's singularly proud and kingly aspect, as with folded arms and lifted head he contemplated the lily-decked altar and the gleaming crucifix upon it, his meditative eyes bespeaking a curious mingling of reverence and contempt. One incident I remember as standing out particularly in all the glare and glitter of the brilliant scene, and has occurred at the signing of our names in the register. When Sybil, a vision of angelic loveliness in all her bridal white, affixed her signature to the entry, Lucio bent towards her. As best man, I claim an old-fashioned privilege, he said, and kissed her gently on the cheek. She blushed a vivid red, then suddenly grew ghastly pale, and with a kind of choking cry, reeled back in, dead faint, in the arms of one of her bridesmaids. It was some minutes before she was restored to consciousness, but she made light both in my arms of us, both of my alarm and the concentration of her friends, and assuring us that it was nothing but the effect of the heat of the weather and the excitement of the day. She took my arm and walked down the aisle smilingly through the brilliant ranks of her staring and envious society friends, all of whom coveted her good fortune. Not because she had married a worthy or gifted man, that would have been no special matter for congratulation, but simply because she had married 5 millions of money. I was the appendage to millions, nothing further. She held her head high and haughtily, though I felt her tremble as thundering strains of bridal march from Lohengrin poured sonorous triumphs on the air. She trod on roses all the way. I remembered that too. Afterward, her satin slipper crushed the hearts of thousands innocent things that must surely have been more dear to God than she. Little harmless souls of flowers whose task in life sweetly fulfilled, and had been to create beauty and fragrance by their mere existence, expired to gratify the vanity of one woman to whom nothing was sacred. But I anticipate. I was yet in my fool's dream, and imagined that the dying blossoms were happy to perish thus beneath her tread. A grand reception was held at Lord Elton's house after the ceremony, and in the midst of the chattering, the eating, the drinking, we, my newly made wife and I, departed amid the profuse flatteries and good wishes of our friends who, primed with the best finest champagne, made very decent show of being sincere. The last person to say farewell to us at the carriage door was Lucio, and the sorrow I felt at parting with him was more than I could express in words. From the very hour of the dawning of my good fortune, we had been almost inseparable companions. I owed my success in society, everything, even my bride herself, to his management and tact. And though I had now won for my life's partner the most beautiful of women, I could not contemplate even the temporary breaking of the association between myself and my gifted and brilliant comrade, without a keen pang of personal pain amid my nuptial joys. Leaning his arms on the carriage window, he looked in upon us both, smiling. My spirit will be with you both in all your journeys, he said, and when you return, I shall be one of the first to bid you welcome home. Your house party is fixed for September, I believe. Yes, and will you be the most eagerly desired guest of all invited? I replied heartily, pressing his hand. Fie, for shame, he retorted laughingly. Be not so disloyal of speech, Geoffrey. Are you not going to entertain the prince, the most popular of men? And shall anyone be more eagerly desired than he? No, I must play a humble third or even fourth on your list where royalty is concerned. My princedom is, alas, not that of Wales, and the throne I might claim, if I had anyone to help me, which I have not, is a long way removed from that of England. Sybil said something. Sybil said nothing, but her eyes rested on his handsome face and fine figure, with an odd wonder of wistfulness, and she was very pale. Goodbye, Lady Sybil, he added gently. All joy be with you. To us who are left behind, your absence will seem long, but to you, love gives wings to time, and what would be to ordinary folks a month of mere dull living will be for you nothing but a moment's rapture. Love is better than wealth. You have found that out already, I know. But I think and hope that you are destined to make the knowledge more certain and complete. Think of me sometimes. Au revoir. The horses startled, a handful of rice flung by the society idiot, who is always at weddings, rattled against the door and on the roof of the brougham, and Lucio stepped back, waving his hand. To the last we saw him, a tall, stately figure on the steps of Lord Elton's mansion, surrounded by an ultra-fashionable throng, bridesmaids in bright attire and picture hats, young girls all eager and excited looking, each of them no doubt longing fervently for the day to come when they might severely manage to secure a rich husband as myself. Matchmaking mothers and wicked old dowagers exhibiting priceless lace on their capacious bosoms and ablaze with diamonds. Men with white buttonhole bouquets in their irreproachably fitting frock coats. Servants in gay livery, and the usual street crowd of idle sightseers. All this cluster of faces, costumes, and flowers was piled against the grey background of the stone portico, and in the midst of the dark beauty of Lucio's face and the luminance of his flashing eyes, made him the conspicuous object and chief centre of attraction. Then the carriage turned a sharp corner, the faces vanished, and Sybil and I realized that from henceforward we were left alone, alone to face the future and ourselves, and to learn the lesson of love, or hate, forevermore together. Chapter 26. I cannot now trace the slow or swift fitting by the phantasmal event, wild ghosts of days or weeks that drifted past and brought me gradually and finally to a time when I found myself wandering numb and stricken and sick at heart by the shores of the lake in Switzerland, a small lake, densely blue, with apparently a thought in its depth such as it reflected in a child's earnest eyes. I gazed down at the clear and glistening water almost unseeingly. The snow-peaked mountains surrounding it were too high for the lifting of my aching sight. Loftiness, purity, and radiance were unbearable to my mind, crushed as it was beneath the weight of dismal wreckage and ruin. What a fool was I, ever to have believed that in this world there could be such a thing as happiness. Misery stared me in the face, lifelong misery, and no escape but death. Misery. It was the word which, like the hellish groan, had been uttered by the three dreadful phantoms that had once, in an evil vision, disturbed my rest. What had I done, I demanded indignantly of myself, to deserve this wretchedness which no wealth could cure? Why was fate so unjust? Like all my kind, I was unable to discern the small yet strong links to the chain I had myself wrought, and which bound me to my own undoing. I blamed fate, or rather God, and talked of injustice merely because I, personally, suffered, never really realizing that what I considered unjust was but the equitable measuring forth of the eternal law, which is carried out with as mathematical an exactitude as the movement of the planets, notwithstanding man's pygmy efforts to impede its fulfillment. The light wind blowing down from the snow peaks above me ruffled the placidity of the little lake by which I aimlessly strolled. I watched the tiny ripples break over its surface like the lines of laughter on a human face and wondered, morosely, whether it was deep enough to drown in. For what was the use of living on, knowing what I knew? Knowing that she whom I had loved, and whom I loved still in a way that was hateful to myself, was a thing viler and more shameless in character than the veriest poor drab of the street who sells herself for a current coin. That the lovely body and angel face were but an attractive disguise for the soul of a harpy, a vulture of vice. My God, an irrepressible cry escaped me as my thoughts went on and on in never ending circle, and my problem of incurable, unspeakable despair. And I threw myself down on a shelving bank of grass at the slope towards the lake, and covered my face in a paroxysm of tearless agony. Still, inexhaustible, thought worked in my brain and forced me to consider my position. Was Sybil more to blame than I myself for all the strange havoc wrought? I had married her of my own free will and choice, and she had told me beforehand, I am contaminated creature, trained to perfection in the lax morals of the prurient literature of my day. Well, and so it had proved. My own blood burned with shame as I reflected how ample and convincing were the proofs, and starting up from the recumbent posture, I paced up and down again restlessly in fever of self-contempt and disgust. What could I do with a woman such as she, to whom I was now bound to for life? Reform her? She would laugh me to scorn for the attempt. Reform myself? She would sneer at me for the effeminate milksop. Besides, was not I as willing to be degraded as she was to degrade me? A very victim to my brute passions? Tortured and maddened by my feelings, I roamed about wildly, and started as if a pistol shot had been fired near me when the plash of oars sounded on the silence, and the keel of a small boat grated on the shore, the boatman within, respectfully begging me in mellifluous French to employ him for an hour. I assented, and in a minute or two was out on the lake in the middle of the red glow of the sunset, which turned the snow summits to points of flame, and the water to a hue of ruby wine. I think the man who rowed me saw that I was in no very pleasant humour, for he preserved a discreet silence, and I, pulling my hat partly over my eyes, lay back in the stern, still busy with my wretched musings. Only a month married, and yet a sickening satiety had taken the place of the so-called deathless lover's passion. There were moments, even, when my wife's matchless physical beauty appeared hideous to me. I knew her as she was, and no exterior charm could ever again cover for me the revolting nature within. And what puzzled me from dawn to dusk was her polished, speculative hypocrisy, her amazing aptitude for lies. To look at her, to hear her speak, one would have deemed her very saint of purity, a delicate creature whom a coarse word would startle and offend, a very incarnation of the sweetest and most gracious womanhood, all heart and feeling and sympathy. Everyone thought thus of her, and never was there a greater error. Heart she had none. That fact was borne in upon me 2 days after our marriage while we were in Paris, for the telegram reached us announcing her mother's death. The paralyzed Countess of Elton had, it appeared, expired suddenly on our wedding day, or rather, our wedding night, but that Earl had deemed it best to wait 48 hours before interrupting our hymeneal happiness with the melancholy tidings. He followed his telegram by a brief letter to his daughter, in which he was concluding lines were these: As you are a bride and are travelling abroad, I should advise you by no means to go into mourning. Under the circumstances, it is really not necessary. And Sybil had readily accepted his suggestion, keeping generally, however, to white and pale mauve colourings in her numerous and wonderful toilettes, in order to not outrage the proprieties too openly in the opinions of the persons known to her, whom she might possibly meet casually in the foreign towns we visited. No word of regret passed her lips, and no tears were shed for her mother's loss. She only said, "What a good thing! Her sufferings are finally over." Then, with a little sarcastic smile, she added, "I wonder when we shall receive the Elton Chesney wedding cards." I did not reply, for I was pained and grieved at her lack of all gentle feeling in the matter, and I was also to a certain extent superstitiously affected by the fact that the death occurring on our marriage day. However, this was now a thing of the past. A month had elapsed, a month in which the tearing down of illusions had gone on daily and hourly, till I was left to contemplate the uncurtained bare prose of life. And the knowledge that I had wedded a beautiful feminine animal with the soul of a shameless libertine. Here I pause and ask myself, was not I also a libertine? Yes, I freely admit it. But the libertinage of a man, while it may run to excess in hot youth, generally resolves itself, under the influence of a great love, into a strong desire for undefiled sweetness and modesty in the woman beloved. If a man has indulged in both folly and sin, the time comes at last when, if he has any good left in him at all, he turns back upon himself and lashes his own vices with the scorpion whip of self-contempt till he smarts with the rage and pain of it. And then, aching in every pulse with his deserved chastisement, he kneels in spirit at the feet of some pure, true-hearted woman, whose white soul, like an angel, hovers compassionately above him, and there lays down his life, saying, "Do what you will with it, it is yours." And woe to her who plays lightly with such a gift, or works fresh injury upon it. No man, even if he has in his day indulged in rapid living, should choose a rapid woman for his wife. He had far better put a loaded pistol in his head and make an end of it. The sunset glory began to fade from the landscape as the little boat glided over the tranquil water, and a great shadow was on my mind, like the shadow of that outer darkness which would soon be night. Again I asked myself, was there no happiness possible in all the world? Just then the angels chimed from a little chapel on the shore, and it rang, a memory stirred in my brain, moving me well nigh to tears. Mavis Clare was happy. Mavis, with her frank, fearless eyes, sweet face, and bright nature. Mavis, wearing her crown of fame as simply as a child might wear a wreath of many blossom. She, with merely moderate share of fortune, which even in its slight proportion was only due to her own hard, incessant work. She was happy. And I, with my millions, was wretched. How was it? Why was it? What had I done? I had lived as my compeers lived. I had followed the lead of society. I had feasted my friends and effectually snubbed my foes. I had comported myself exactly as others of my wealth comport themselves, and I had married a woman whom most men, looking upon me once, would have been proud to win. Nevertheless, there seemed to be a curse upon me. What had I missed out of in life? I knew, but I was ashamed to own it, because I had previously scorned what I called the dream nothings of mere sentiment. And now I had acknowledged the paramount importance of those dream nothings, out of which all true living must come. I had to realize that my marriage was nothing but the mere mating of the male and female animal, a coarse bodily union and no more, that all the finer and deeper emotions which make a holy thing of human wedlock were lacking. The mutual respect, the trusting sympathy, the lovely confidence of mind with mind, the subtle inner spirit bond which no science can analyze, and which is much closer and stronger than the material and knits immortal souls together when bodies decay. These things had no existence and never would exist between my wife and me. Thus, as far as I was concerned, there was a strange blankness in the world. I was thrust back upon myself for comfort, and found none. What should I do with my life, I wondered drearily? Win fame? True fame? After all, with Sybil's witch eyes mocking my efforts, never. If I had ever any gifts of creative thought within me, I would have killed it. The hour was over. The boatman rowed me into the land, and I paid him and dismissed him. The sun had completely sunk, and there were dense purple shadows darkening over the mountains, and one or two small stars were faintly discernible in the east. I walked slowly back to the villa where we were staying, a dependence belonging on the large hotel of the district, which we had rented for the sake of privacy and independence, some of the hotel servants being portioned off to attend upon us. In addition to my own man Morris and my wife's maid, I found Sybil in the garden, reclining in a basket chair, her eyes fixed on the afterglow of the sunset, and in her harsh hands a book, one of the loathliest of the pertinent novels that have been lately written by women to degrade and shame their sex. With a sudden impulse of rage upon me, which I could not resist, I snatched the volume from her and flung it into the lake below. She made no movement of either surprise or offense. She merely turned her eyes away from the glowing heavens and looked at me with a little smile. "How violent you are today, Geoffrey," she said. I gazed at her in sombre silence. From the light hat with its pale mauve orchids that rested on her nut-brown hair to the point of her daintily embroidered shoe, her daintily embroidered shoe, her dress was perfect, and she was perfect. I knew that. A matchless piece of womanhood. Outwardly, my heart beat. There was a sense of suffocation in my throat. I could have killed her for the mingled loathing and longing which her beauty roused in me. "I'm sorry," I said hoarsely, avoiding her gaze, "but I hate to see you with such a book as that." "You know its contents?" she queried with the same slight smile. "I can guess." "Such things have to be written, they say, nowadays," she went on, "and certainly to judge from the condemnation bestowed on these sorts of books by the press, it is very evident that the wave of opinion is setting in the direction of letting girls know all about marriage before they enter upon it, in order that they may do so with their eyes wide open, very wide open." She laughed, and her laughter hurt me like a physical wound. "What an old-fashioned idea the bride of poets and 60 years ago romanticists seem now," she continued. "Imagine her, a shrinking, tender creature, shy of beholders, timid of speech, wearing the emblematic veil, which in former days, you know, used to cover the face entirely as a symbol that the secrets of marriage were as yet hidden from the maiden's innocent and ignorant eyes. Now the veil is worn, flung back from the bride's brows, and she stares unabashed at everybody. Oh, yes. Indeed, we know quite well what we are doing now when we marry, thanks to the new fiction." "The new fiction is detestable," I said hotly, "both in style and in morality. Even as a question of literature, I wonder at your condescending to read it, any of it. The woman whose dirty book I have just thrown away, and I feel no compunction for having done it. It is destitute of grammar as well as decency." "Oh, but the critics don't notice that," she interrupted, with delicate mockery vibrating in her voice. "It is apparently not their business to assist in preserving the purity of the English language. What they fall into raptures over is originality of the sexual theme, though I should have thought all such matters were as old as the hills. I never read reviews as a rule, but I did happen to come across one on the book you have just drowned, and in it the reviewer stated he had cried over it." She laughed again. "Beast," I said empathetically. "He probably found it in some glozing over his own vices. But you, Sybil, why do you read such stuff? How can you read it?" "Curiosity moved me in the first place," she answered listlessly. "I wanted to see what makes a reviewer cry. Then, when I began to read it, I found that the story was all about the manner in which men amuse themselves with the soiled doves of the highways and the byways. And as I was not very well instructed in that sort of thing, I thought I might as well learn. You know, these unpleasant morsels of information on unsavory subjects are like the repudiated suggestions of the devil. If you listen to one, you are bound to hear more. Besides, literature is supposed to reflect the time in which we live, and that kind of literature being more prevalent than anything else, we are compelled to accept and study it as the mirror of the age. With an expression on her face that was half mirth and half scorn, she rose from her seat and looked down to the lovely lake below her. "Hmm. The fishes will eat that book," she observed. "I hope it will not poison them. If they could read and understand it, what singular ideas they would have of us human beings." "Why don't you read Mavis Clare's books?" I asked suddenly. "You told me you admired her." "So I do, immensely," she answered. "I admire her and wonder at her both together. How that woman can keep her child's heart and child's faith in a world like this is more than I can understand. It is always a perfect marvel to me, a sort of supernatural surprise. You ask me why don't I read her books? I do read them. I've read them all over and over again. But she does not write many, and one has to wait for her productions longer than those of most authors. When I want to feel like an angel, I read Mavis Clare, but when I more often am inclined to feel the other way, and then her books are merely so many worries to me." "Worries?" I echoed. "Yes, it is worrying to find somebody believing in a God when you can't believe in him, to have beautiful faiths offered to you which you can't grasp, and to know that there is a creature alive, a woman like yourself, in everything except mind, who's holding fast a happiness which you can never attain. No, not though you held out praying hands day and night and shouted wild appeals to the dull heavens." At that moment, she looked like a queen of tragedy, her violet eyes ablaze, her lips apart, her breast heaving. I approached her with strange nervous hesitation and touched her hand. She gave it to me passively. I drew it through my arm, and for a minute or two paced silently up and down the gravel walk. The lights from the monster hotel which catered for us and our wants were beginning to twinkle from the basement to the roof, and just above the chalet we rented a triad of stars sparkled in the shape of a trefoil. "Poor, poor Geoffrey," she said presently, with a quick upward glance at me. "I am sorry for you. With all my vagaries of disposition, I am not a fool, and at any rate, I have learned how to analyze myself as well as others. I read you as easily as I read a book. I see what a strange tumult your mind is in. You love me, and you loathe me, and the contrast of emotion makes a wreck of you and your ideals. Shh, don't speak. I know, I know. But what would you have of me? An angel? I cannot realize such being for more than a fleeting moment of imagination. A saint? Well, they're all martyred. A good woman? I never met one. Innocent? Ignorant? I told you before we were married that I was neither. There is nothing left for me to discover as far as the relations between men and women are concerned. I have taken the measure of the inherent love of vice in both sexes. There is not a pin to choose between them. Men are no worse than women, women no worse than men. I have discovered everything, everything except God, and I conclude no God could ever have designed such a crazy and mean business as human life." While she thus spoke, I could have fallen at her feet and implored her to be silent, for she was unknowingly giving utterance to some of the many thoughts in which I myself frequently indulged, and yet from her lips they sounded cruel, unnatural, and callous to a degree that made me shrink from her in fear and agony. We had reached a little grove of pines, and here in the silence and the shadow I took her in my arms and stared discontentedly upon the beauty of her face. Sybil, I whispered. Sybil, what is wrong with us both? How is it that we do not seem to find the loveliest side of love? Why is it that even in our kisses and embraces, some impalpable darkness comes between us, so that we anger or weary of each other, when we should be glad and satisfied? What is it? Can you tell? For you know the darkness is there. A curious look came into her eyes, a faraway, strained look of hungry yearning, mingled, as I thought, with compassion for me. Yes, it is there, she answered slowly, and it is of our own mutual creation. I believe you have something nobler in your nature, Geoffrey, than I have in mine, an indefinable something that recoils from me with my theories despite your wish and will. Perhaps if you had given way to that feeling in time, you would never have married me. You speak of the loveliest side of love. To me, there is no lovely side. It's all coarse and horrible. You and I, for instance, cultured man and woman, we cannot in marriage get a flight beyond the common emotions of Hodge and his girl. She laughed violently and shuddered in my arms. What liars the poets are, Geoffrey! They ought to be sentenced to lifelong imprisonment for their perjuries. They help to mold the credulous beliefs of woman's heart. In her early youth, she reads their delicious assurances and imagines that love will be all they teach, a thing divine and lasting beyond earthly countings. Then comes the coarse finger of prose on the butterfly wing, of poesy and of bitterness and hideousness of complete disillusion. I held her still in my arms, with the fierce grasp of a man clinging to a spar ere he drowns in the mid-ocean. But I love you, Sybil. My wife, I love you, I said, with a passion that choked my utterance. You love me, yes, I know, but how? In a way that is abhorrent to yourself, she replied. It's not poetic love. It is man's love, and man's love is brute love. So it is, so it will be, so it must be. Moreover, the brute love soon tires, and when it dies out from satiety, there is nothing left. Nothing, Geoffrey, absolutely nothing but a blank and civil form of intercourse, which I do not doubt we shall be able to keep up for the admiration and comment of society. She disengaged herself from my embrace and moved towards the house. Come, she added, turning her exquisite head back over her shoulder with feline caressing grace that she alone possessed. You know there is a famous lady in London who advertises her sable charms to the outside public by means of her monogram worked into her lace of all her window blinds. Thinking it no doubt good for trade, I'm not quite so bad as that. You have paid dearly for me, I know, but remember I as yet wear no jewels but yours, and crave no gifts beyond those you are generous enough to bestow. And my dutiful desire is to give you as much full value as I can for your money. Sybil, you kill me, I cried, tortured beyond endurance. Do you think me so base? I broke off with almost a sob of despair. You cannot help being base, she said steadily regarding me, because you are a man. I am base because I am a woman. If we believed in a God, either of us, we might discover some different way of life and love. Who knows? But neither you nor I have any remnant of faith in a being whose existence all the scientists of the day are ever at work to disprove. We are presently taught that we are animals and nothing more. Let us therefore not be ashamed of the animalism. Animalism and atheism are approved by the scientists and applauded by the press, and the clergy are powerless to enforce the faith they preach. Come, Geoffrey, don't stay mooning like a stricken paraphale under those pines. Throw away that thing which troubles you, your conscience. Throw it away as you have thrown the book I was lately reading. And consider this, that most men of your type take pride and rejoice in being the prey of a bad woman. So you should really congratulate yourself on having one for a wife, one who is so broad-minded too. And she will always let you have your own way in everything you do, provided you let her have hers. It is the way all marriages are arranged nowadays, at any rate in our set. Otherwise, the tie would be impossible of endurance. Come, we cannot live together on such an understanding, Sybil, I said hoarsely, as I walked slowly by her side towards the villa. Oh, yes, we can, she averred, a little malign smile playing around her lips. We can do as others do. There is no necessity for us to stand out from the rest like quixotic fools, and pose as models to other married people. We should only be detested for our pains. It is surely better to be popular than virtuous. Virtue never pays. See, there is our interesting German waiter coming to inform us that dinner is ready. Please don't look so utterly miserable, for we have not quarrelled, and it would be foolish to let servants think we have. I made no answer. We entered the house and dined, Sybil keeping up perfect fire of conversation, to which I replied in mere monosyllables. And after dinner, we went as usual to sit in the illuminated gardens of the adjacent hotel and hear the band. Sybil, known and universally admired and flattered by many of the people staying there, and, as she moved about among her acquaintances, chatting first with one group and then with another, I sat in moody silence, watching her with increasing wonderment and horror. Her beauty seemed to me like the beauty of a poison flower, which, brilliant in color and perfect in shape, exhales death to those who pluck it from its stem. And that night, when I held her in my arms and felt her heart beating against my own in the darkness, an awful dread arose in me, a dread as to whether I might not, at some time or other, be tempted to strangle her as she lay on my breast, strangle her as one would strangle a vampire that sucked one's blood and strength away. That is where we end for the evening. So make certain that, first of all, thank you for all the comments, the likes, and the shares. Thank you for all of the compliments on the painting. If you are enjoying my channel, a great way of keeping the channel alive is to go onto my Patreon, patreon.com/The Gentleman Psychic. You can also find me on my PayPal at rlillard6@gmail.com. That's a great way to do it. Of course, if you can give, it is always appreciated, no matter what it may be. If you cannot, I still love you. I still am grateful that you are here. And I am so glad that each and every one of you stayed to listen. At any rate, I'm going to start during the weekend, I think, maybe this weekend, reading the sequel to this one, The Motor of the Devil, by the same Marie Corelli that wrote this book. So, at any way, my loves, thank you for joining me here at The Gentleman Psychic. I am your host, as always, Richard Lillard. Richard Lale is one name, it is not two. Love to you. Have a beautiful and pleasant evening, morning, night, whatever it may be in your part of the world. Take care.